welcome to Let's Talk Medtech, the premier podcast for the medical device and diagnostic industry. My name is Omar Ford. I'm the host of Let's Talk MedTech. I'm also editor-in-chief of MDDI, an online publication owned by Informa that is for the MedTech engineer. On this episode of Let's Talk MedTech, we are going to be speaking with Chris Toth. He is the CEO of Vantive, the renal care business that was spun out from Baxter earlier this year. This is a mind-blowing conversation. Chris is very passionate about all the work that Vantive is doing right now in renal care. And we just really go in depth about how the company is developing a digital platform to enhance patient care. And also, we talk about what it means to be a good leader in medtech, to be a great CEO. Chris gives some amazing tips, and this is a can't miss episode. So I can't wait for you to hear it. And without further ado, let's talk MedTech with Vantive's Chris Toth. Well, hello, Chris, and welcome to Let's Talk MedTech. Thanks for coming on to the show.
Thanks, Omar. Thanks for having me.
I'm really excited about this conversation we're about to have about Vantive. The company was spun off from Baxter. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about that process and how it's been establishing Vantive's identity outside of Baxter?
Yeah. I mean, first, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about Vantive. We're so excited what we're doing as a company now on a standalone basis. Our mission is extending lives and expanding possibilities, and we focus in vital organ therapies with a rich history in dialysis, and then also a presence within the acute setting for acute kidney injury or toxin removal in some parts of the globe for helping patients with sepsis, et cetera. And as you noted, we've been through a process. We've been through a process of separating from Baxter and a carve out. And I actually started with what I did around our mission and some of the areas that we have an opportunity to serve patients, because that's been our focus in that separation process. And so quite a bit of work to do to carve out a business. We're around $4.5 billion of revenue globally. We operate in over 100 countries. We have over 1 million patient touch points per day. And so just taking those operations and extracting them out and creating a standalone ability is something that we've been working on well in advance of what was day one, which was February 1st of 2025 for us. And we'll be working on here for the foreseeable future. But probably most exciting is the things I articulated about where we want to go. Those are our capital allocation priorities now. So we're making investments behind making that impact.
Well, and to talk about that just a little bit more, because the company has a 70-year history. But with that being said, you're also brand new. And I had the same conversation a couple of years ago with Embecta's CEO when they spun out.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, how are you brand new? How do you have that fresh feel, but that 70-year history at the same time? How do you balance that?
Yeah, the way that we've seen it come to life is the human being who needs the care. And so there was a woman named PK Hand, and she had an opportunity to speak to our team as we were in the midst of the separation process. We had our top 150 leaders together, and then we actually just had a similar meeting a couple weeks back with that same group now post-separation. And we refer back to PK's story, and in her story, her life was changed very much for the positive with what's called peritoneal dialysis, what we are the world leader in, what was invented by Baxter and therefore by proxy by Vantive, which is done at home overnight while the patient sleeps. There are multiple ways to do it. One is an automated version, which is the overnight while a patient sleeps in their bed and is monitored. And we really brought to life PK and what we heard a year ago from her, and then the connection point of over 1 million touch points per day with patients, because there's so many stories that are similar. So that's kind of where the mojo or the uniqueness has come from, is it comes back to the patient. And we're really thankful for and proud of the rich history with Baxter, the invention of peritoneal dialysis, the invention of continuous renal replacement therapy, which is done in the acute setting for acute kidney injury. Many of the innovations that have been in the portfolio all happened under that kind of initial incarnation inside of Baxter. But what has been really nice about this step forward of separation is that as we now go on our own, our capital allocation focus is really to those therapies versus in a much larger organization in a multitude of different areas to allocate to, you can have more focus. So really, if I were to sort of just stratify it back and come back to the point of the patient, for us, it has been the patient is the rallying cry. We put the patient at the center. Along with that patient is the provider. How do we make the provider's life better? And that's what's created the mojo. The excitement is this kind of lean in an area where everyone believes in these therapies. We know they're underpenetrated. We know there's innovation to drive. And now that we're separate, we can put the investment behind it.
Awesome, awesome. And that is a perfect segue into my next question. And let's jump into some recent news, and that is the $1 billion investment over the next 5 years to support digitally enabled therapies. Can you talk a little bit about that? Can you go into some detail about it?
Yeah. So we had spent some time. I'll give you a little bit of history and I'll kind of lead into
Sure.
talking more about what's coming. So it's a bit of both,
Yeah.
because sometimes looking back a bit helps to know where we're going in the future.
Yes.
We had spent some concerted time. I had the opportunity to join prior to day one with the plan to be the CEO as we separate the business. And so it allowed some planning inside of Baxter, not only to stand up the company, but also look at the strategic priorities of the business. And so as we looked at the strategic priorities, home dialysis and specifically peritoneal dialysis just popped and emerged as an area that there's so much opportunity to improve what can be done to help patients. And it's way underutilized, underpenetrated. In fact, globally, home dialysis is only about 10% of what patients are getting, when that percentage should be significantly higher. And then in the acute care setting, what we had seen is we have this incredible device called Prismax that sits in the ICU. And Prismax has a series of therapies that are used to help patients. The primary therapy is what's called continuous renal replacement therapy, CRRT, for acute kidney injury. But there were other options or opportunities of therapies because of the way this device works and how it filters out toxins from the body, that we saw, wow, there's a chance to invest more to help patients that have septic shock be able to beat it with a therapy that could help remove some of the critters, the terrible bits out of their blood that are affecting them with septic shock. And then there's some other commensurate type of examples as well. But rather than going to those, sort of boiling it back to this, how did we arrive at it? Where are we leaning in? What are we doing? When we named the company Vantive, we were actually distinct on the V and how the V looks. So if you look at the V at the base, there's kind of a tip that's there, and that tip of the V is the therapy. And then there's the two sides to the V, and we view one as digital and the other as services. And so what we're here to do between a combination of digital and services is to better enable the therapy, because we believe where someone lives shouldn't determine if they live. We should create an elevated standard. So this concept has been digitally enabled therapy. So not only are we trying to enhance the therapy itself or expand to new therapies under a vital organ therapy category, but we're creating a rich digital ecosystem. So in the example of a patient at home who's getting dialysis at home, we're creating a digital embrace for that patient. We can see what's happening with their dialysis overnight. If something isn't quite right, we can notify the nurse or the nephrologist so they can help intervene. We also have created the ability for the patient to message back to their provider. And we can start to see some of the messages coming off the device, because maybe proactively we just need to do something, remote connect in, proactively call the patient and help support them in different ways. And so that digitally enabled therapy component is what was referenced there, where we're further building that out, and we're adding services. And for example, in the services, as a patient starts with home dialysis, the first 90
Mhm.
days are tough. They're figuring
Yeah.
out how to use the system, what to do. So we've created a whole separate set of triaging and support so we can almost handhold for those first 90 days. So all of that kind of goes into the basket of digitally enabled therapies from a dialysis standpoint. And then in the acute care setting, with the continuous renal replacement therapy or other therapies, what we've started to see is based on the patient's lab results or based on the filter that's doing the filtration's performance, we can provide different input points to the nurse or the intensivist to help them make decisions and get better utilization of the system. And so we're really focused on leaning in, not digital for digital's sake, right? It's not a
Yeah.
buzzword, okay? It's about there's a
Gotcha.
human being who needs care. How do we
Hmm.
better enable that therapy? And I frequently say to our organization, we have to do our jobs as if it was our mother, father, brother, sister, or child getting care. And that comes to our quality basis, that comes to our innovation priorities, that comes to how we show up every day. And when I think about it, it's the simple test. In these instances, I think about my mom. I think about what she would need at home, what would make sure she gets the right care in the ICU, and
Yes.
it filters through. But this is about digitally enabling those capabilities. The only other note, Omar, I'd share is with this investment of greater than $1
Hmm.
billion over the next 5 years, we're also going to be expanding supply. And so
Okay.
there's an innovation side of this picture where we've got all sorts of cool new technology, but knowing that the therapies we offer could benefit so many more human beings, extending lives, expanding possibilities, extending lives, expanding possibilities. We need to also create more capacity to continue to scale with that globally.
Well, you touched on and you said a lot of things, and one of the things that stands out to me, I remember I was a kid growing up in South Carolina, rural
Yeah,
South Carolina in the
yeah,
80s, and my aunt was on dialysis. That's
yeah,
what we call it. We said on dialysis,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And she had to take these trips to the dialysis center, and
Yes.
I remember it was just painful for her. It was just
Yeah,
arduous.
yeah.
And I'm trying to think because that was years ago. I know I'm telling my age right here, but it was years ago, and I can remember the difficulty. I can remember the anxiety if she
Yes.
missed the transport because she couldn't drive up there, couldn't drive
Right.
back. It was the bus that
Yeah.
came into the neighborhood and picked her up. So yeah, yeah, this is
I,
this is simply amazing. Yeah,
well, I mean, I just feel so compelled to comment here. I mean, first,
sure.
thank you for sharing that. I mean, I can very much see exactly what happens in that process, and this has been in the rural setting,
Yeah,
especially,
yeah,
just a big unlock. And what we've also seen, just to share some examples
sure, sure.
from talking to patients, what they found is when they go into the clinic, they're seeing that the day before going in is about psychologically psyching themselves up to go in. Then they
Yes.
go in and they sit in the chair in the clinic for 3 to 4 hours. Typically, it's a 4 hour session, and then they will leave and they spend that evening trying to cognitively recover. They're attempting to sort of get back to life. And
Yes.
then the next day is a similar psych back up for the cycle to continue. Alternatively, talking to a number of patients who are getting home dialysis, specifically peritoneal dialysis, where there's a catheter that goes into the stomach and then a solution that comes in overnight with a dwell where it stays in the peritoneum, the cavity, the stomach lining area. It helps to filter out through the vasculature the toxins. They're feeling in the morning where they can go about their day, participate, they're cognitively more clear, and so on. What we're seeing in many of these rural settings as well is just the difficulty for the patient. And then what we've done is we've built a really robust network where we can deliver across all the different states to make sure that we can get to the patient's home the supply. So I've repeated now probably 4 or 5 times
Yeah.
at this point our mission of extending lives, expanding possibilities. But when we were naming the company Omar, there was a moment where in actually the video that the branding agency had given us, saw a picture of a grandfather holding his granddaughter's hand and the sun in the background. And it hit me like a ton of bricks.
Yeah.
Life is short. And if we can do things for people in major times of need, where we
Yes.
can create an opportunity for that one more memory, that new possibility, that better tomorrow, that's what we're here to do. That's what we're here to do. And so, as you can tell, I get pretty charged up over this, but
Yeah. No, no.
hearing your aunt's story, it very much connected to me. That is why we're doing what we're doing, because it all sounds good, but if we then don't have the digital connectivity, if we don't have the back end support, if we don't build that digital embrace, that ecosystem,
Mhm.
it will sound good, but it doesn't manifest itself that way in the world. And so that's where we're pretty excited to build on what we've started. We've started a lot of this. So the things I'm
Mhm.
talking about aren't all just future state. What the future is building new features on the platform that we've started along these lines.
Oh, awesome. Awesome. Yeah. And just digital, whenever we talk about just the digital landscape now, it's hard to find devices or it's hard to find med tech now without some digital health component.
Yeah,
It's much different. I remember I started my career in med tech in 2007,
yeah,
and you pie in the sky. You heard about it a little bit, right? And then Google came in like 2010 to no 2010, 2012, and just started all these partnerships and kind of went wild with AI and machine learning. But now it's just a norm. It's just normalized for medtech to be embracing digital health, and
yes.
it's just interesting how things have changed.
So it's been this build too, where I felt like, we can both share timestamps to kind of
Yeah.
show our age, if you will. But I could, as I go back a couple decades, right? So digital seemed like this foreign concept. Then you started to see emergence of some software systems.
Yeah.
Then you started to see digital really to enable the therapy. And then you saw this kind of panacea promise where, like, if you just said digital, it will solve every ailment ever needed. And then there's been a bit of a movement back, right?
Yes,
Where
yes.
I think where we sit today, I mean, as we're in 2025, what I'm really excited about is when I talk to you about digitally enabled therapies,
Mm,
it's not a PowerPoint slide. These are engineering projects with heft, with patient stories behind them,
mm,
with a
mm,
real
mm.
drive to increase the quality of care. And when I look at artificial intelligence on the horizon
Mm.
as well, what I see is a pragmatism that's now present in the conversations. Show me a statistical comparison across these 50 patients with similar data. What am I seeing for patient Mrs. Smith that may give me an indication that I need to make a modification to the regimen now to avoid an issue
Yes.
downstream? These are all real things through utilizing anonymized data, artificial intelligence, more sophisticated algorithms. And so I do think we're going to enter a period in the next decade where not only is digital so intertwined,
Mhm.
but we're going to start to see some of this promise that we've been hopeful for elevating what can happen.
That being said, when you're designing your team, um, how has that changed over the years in terms of who'll be a part of the company? Do you have to have more software engineers, for example?
Yeah,
Is it totally different than maybe it was, let's say, 15, 20 years ago?
for sure. Yeah,
Yeah,
no, it
yeah.
really, it really has shifted.
Mhm.
Um, so most definitely, if you just look at from an engineering pool, there's been an
Yeah.
increase in software engineers, not necessarily in place of mechanical engineers or other folks who've been more on the design side or the scientists who've been behind the formulation of the medications or other, but kind of in addition to, right? So it's a complement. Like, okay, well, what's the next innovation that can unlock? it's very likely to be, what can we do with the digital? So now as we're expanding our engineering, we're moving more with an expansion of software engineering. What I've also seen, and this goes just outside of the engineering sphere, is the most successful product leaders and product managers. So kind of division leaders and product managers are the ones who focus on what problem we're trying to solve for the patient and what is in the Swiss Army knife of tools to solve the problem versus it's, hey, all I have is a hammer and everything's a nail. And so this ties into, in this digital application, this broader set of bits that could give information where it may not be a full platform redesign of the MedTech device. It could be a build on to the existing architecture that then leverages more digital. Or maybe it is a full redesign, but when the redesign is done, the operating system is built with APIs and other connection points that allow to hook into a broader digital universe. So it's thinking about both. It's the complete view is really where I've seen the shift. But certainly back to your initial question, significant increase in software engineers for sure.
Oh, interesting. Chris, I want to talk now about the rest of 2025 and what that holds for Vantive. Any upcoming plans that you can talk about or you can tease? I know we talked a
Yeah,
little bit about what's coming over the next 10 years or so, some of our
yeah,
predictions
yeah.
and stuff, but 2025, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I'd love to. So, actually, many of these digital tools that I've been talking
yeah,
about
yeah.
from a peritoneal dialysis perspective, we're in a ramp phase relative to those tools in the United States. So we have got over these coming months with the digitally enabled services, the digital infrastructure, our America's team, and by proxy, the US team. But we are launching this not only in the US right now, we're doing it in Canada as well as in Mexico and some other Latin American countries. The Americas team is meeting literally in parallel to this conversation we're having. We're going through a lot of digital pieces. And so if I am in a clinic in the United States or in one of the countries where we're rolling out and scaling, and I was working with a patient on peritoneal dialysis, I now have more access to these digital tools, the digitally enabled services. My patients could communicate back with my PD is the name of the application. So these things are happening live. And then as we continue to innovate, the updates and new features will continue to flow out. So we've taken, Omar, what I think is the pragmatic and in some respects a unique sort of view to this is we're not trying to charge additional for the digital. We're trying to enable a better therapy. So we're opening the floodgates to make this available in the market. And we think that it's going to help patients perform better. Better performing patients will for sure help our business relative to the right utilization of home dialysis. But we've got human beings' lives on the line. So that's what I would expect is seeing more of these tools rolling out and scaling commensurately over the next 12 months. So it kind of goes into 26, right? So not quite just to the end of 25. You'll be seeing more capabilities and launches in the acute care setting. We just finished in partnership with Spectral, which is a company that is doing the trial work around what's called PMX, aseptic shock therapy, accrual of that trial. So all that data is being worked through, the filing to go into the FDA, the next steps there, and so on and so forth. So as we get into 26, and probably more like the second half of 26,
Sure.
see that therapy come live, and that therapy is exciting. You know, I don't want to get the cart ahead of the horse here, but what I would say with that is in sepsis or septic shock, 1 in 5 deaths in the United States tie back to sepsis, and there have been a limited number of options relative to therapy. This particular therapy was showing in a larger clinical trial previously done that a subset of cases that are within a certain level of the infection range. So if you do an endotoxin assay and you see that you're within that range, that you could reduce the relative risk of mortality pretty substantially. And I mean, look, that's what matters, right? How do we extend that life, expand the possibility? And so that's another therapy that's going to be coming out as part of these investments. We're putting some serious horsepower behind that as well to make sure that as we go from filing into launch, we've got a lot of exciting, not only clinical data to put forward, but the right heft and support with the supply chain side to deliver for patients.
Awesome. Awesome. And final question for you, Chris. For any first-time CEO or any leader, what advice would you give them if this is their first time heading up a company, if this is their first time in any type of leadership position, with your career and what you've done, what would you tell that first time, that newbie CEO or MedTech leader? Yep.
Listen. Listen to your organization, create the ability to be approached, and make sure that before you just act, you take time to gather what people put forward. One of the biggest lessons in my career is you can do anything, not everything. And so you got to choose wisely. And if you're going to choose wisely, you may come in, it may feel right based on a PowerPoint or 3 or 4 conversations to go one direction. Don't feel rushed to make that decision. Listen. Listen to your organization. Be approachable. You will get a better answer. And ultimately, what you do when you listen is you move from people looking at you as being the smartest person in the room, expected to give all the answers, to creating the smartest room. Because by listening, you're engendering dialogue among your teams and you're allowing different people to show up in different ways. So that would be what I would share.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Chris, thanks for coming on to Let's Talk MedTech.
Yeah, thanks so much, Omar. It was a real pleasure.
That's it for this episode of Let's Talk MedTech. Thanks once again to our guest, Chris Toth, the CEO of Vantive. It was an amazing conversation, and I hope all of you enjoyed it. And if you want to hear more content and more conversations like that and find more episodes of Let's Talk MedTech, please visit us at mddionline.com. That's mddionline.com. You can find all of your MedTech news and content there. Finally, please make sure to rate, review, and subscribe to Let's Talk MedTech on Apple Podcast or wherever you get your podcast.